Hi, I'm Bob Keesaer, architect with the City of Louisville. Nulu. Nulu is a fast-growing, progressive area just northeast of downtown and borders the Butchertown Historic Preservation District. This area, originally known for its art galleries, is now growing as a unique place for restaurants and retail too. Nulu is a great example of urban revitalization and a model for using existing historic buildings and giving them a funky architectural twist. In this episode, we'll take a look at what's happening in Nulu today.
The first thing I would do is talk about what this neighborhood used to be, and not most recently, but what was it in the beginning? Why is it called Market Street? What was the streetscape like at that point in time?
Nulu was originally started, it had a couple different names over time. The whole area of that neighborhood was populated largely by immigrant populations, and mainly German and Irish settled there during the 1840s through the 1860s and onward. If you think about it in the context of the 19th century, people would live in their neighborhood and they would walk to the marketplace, and on East Market Street, of course the name is appropriate, that's where people were buying their food and their dry goods.
Market Street and this 800 block is wider from face to face of building than the other blocks, and historically there was a market building there long ago in the middle where you would drive cattle or hogs or whatever, and they would get collected in that space. So it's wider in that scale, but then the scale of the buildings is quite modest and small. This was more about market and smaller shops.
And then fast forward to 10 years ago.
You know, this neighborhood is just complete, it's night and day. As opposed to what it was a decade ago. Nulu is a great case for trying to revive neighborhoods that have, maybe fallen in disrepair, that don't see much happening in it.
Fast forward to now, where the slow infusion of some wonderful people that are involved in this neighborhood has created something that now will continue to roll.
It is really a thriving, community with great food, great art, great shopping.
There's things that are just like they have been and they're just worn out and they're just as they are. And then there are new things going in, and it gives a real depth to the backdrop of the framework that you're existing in within the neighborhood.
It was said that Louisville is full of eclectic neighborhoods shaped by the times they were developed in. East of downtown is no exception. Those learned in both history and architecture can agree that one of Louisville's greatest assets is the number of surviving buildings that date back to the 19th century or earlier.
The Italianate architectural style is characterized a lot by the long, slender windows. There'll be a heavy bracketing along the cornice line. In the commercial storefronts, you can have cast iron facades, and there'll be columns that are playing off the classical styles, but they do have a distinctive character because of their cast iron.
Some urban areas have lost their uniqueness of having authentic buildings that were constructed over a century ago. Although it is easy to spot the so-called missing teeth, where buildings have disappeared, even these gaps hold value, as limitless potential for new development exists in these spaces.
It's not a cohesive urban fabric that's perfectly intact from 1860. But it does have a lot of players in that, and the kind of the DNA of the neighborhood has that history woven into it. And I think it might have been cheaper for us to knock this down and build a new modern building. I do new buildings all the time. That would be a great challenge, but I'm always interested in what happens when you can work with what's there and respect the past for what's there. And I think that's a lot of the thinking that's going on here, is that you've got this great resource of the built environment that you should protect and adaptively use.
We're getting the opportunity to renew those buildings that are still here, but also do some things adjacent to them that's starting to reestablish a fabric that may include an homage to the old or something totally new that's a contrast to the old. So I think that's the excitement that I have for this city on that level.
Nulu is yet another destination, another entry in the menagerie of eclectic neighborhoods that can draw people in by the vibe that is happening around them, but also what is built around them. While 4th Street returns to its roots, Nulu has evolved and survived in a changing environment. Looking up and down Market Street, the retail shops, cafes, and art galleries seem to fit organically in the structures they are housed in.
Well, the types of buildings, and a lot of them are Italianate commercial buildings from the mid and late 19th century. So the spaces that they have inside of them are perfectly adaptable to modern businesses and restaurants, and create unique spaces that are interesting and play off the historic and architectural character that are in those buildings.
It's like, you know, the exterior is still kind of classic and historical, but the interior is, you know, it's retro in a way, but it's still, you know, new. You know, the space is just really nice and clean and refurbished. So it, you know, it does have that older vintage feel, but it's nice and clean.
And I had made a conscious decision at that point that we were going to do the outside of the building so that we could spur interest. And just happenstance, the first day I was meeting with my contractor, I got a phone call from Linda Hopp, our tenant at Alter Ego, and she said, "I hear you have a building. I'd like to put my dress shop in there."
So I think that's why people are drawn to reusing buildings of that nature, because they provide a large space that can be very adaptable to different types of uses, either being retail or a restaurant or even offices or condominiums, apartments. They're very versatile.
These classic buildings with new purposes are a far cry from their original inception.
We were initially a company that since '72 was out in the suburbs. We thought we'd come here, and we've enjoyed that move for those reasons, that we're part of what's become a very vibrant area. We thought we'd do that here, take an old building, repurpose the old building, and ultimately show that, boy, you know, that kind of thing can occur. 8 years ago when we made that decision, it was a decision that ultimately also was geared towards making ourselves our own guinea pigs for a couple other things, most prominently LEED certification.
Well, about 10 years ago, 2003, a friend of ours, Jeff Rollins, who's with Architectural Artisans in the neighborhood, I was having conversations with him, and he called out of the blue and said, "There's a couple buildings that are for sale with some other buildings in town that I want you to look at." And we came through the space, literally had kind of a visceral gut reaction to the buildings and said, "We'll take them." The essence of the building had been obscured over time with facade material, so you really couldn't even tell that there was a beautiful historic building behind it. But walking through, I could tell from my just background as an architect doing a lot of renovation that it had good bones and had a lot of potential.
Well, I've been a fan of Nulu. I lived in Butchertown for 10 years and kind of watched this area develop. And I used to come up here with my newborn daughter. We'd come up to the coffee shop and get a coffee and a sweet treat and what have you. And Gil Holland, who's done most of the work down here to kind of curate this neighborhood, approached me and said, "I'd like you to open up a second store in Nulu." He showed me this space and it was really nice. It was ready to go, ready to move in. And then in March of this year, we opened up our second location down on East Market Street in Nulu. And this place has an art gallery. We have monthly art shows with the First Friday Trolley Hop.
Structurally, The way it was set up and spanned was not great, so we added additional structural supports for the floors, the ceilings, and the roofs. The front facade, there's a huge crack in the limestone, the original limestone, so actually we let that inform the architecture of how the vitrine windows were made, so there's an exposed steel detail there that is holding up the facade. Mechanically and electrically and plumbing, it's all new, 100% new. Basically, there was nothing of value in the space.
Deca Restaurant is one, Garage Bar is another one. Those projects came about for us as a direct result of being here. They were clients that felt the same way that we did about the neighborhood, that there was a drive to do sustainable things as part of the development of the neighborhood, that wanted to do projects that ultimately they could be a part of this same restaurant and gallery district that was blossoming.
It was perfect timing. I walked her through the space, which was really falling down. I mean, most people would walk into it and say, I couldn't possibly put a shop in there, but she walked in and said, this will be perfect. A partner that had vision at the same time was key to making this happen.
Those projects, again, were in older buildings and took buildings that were in, for the most part, in horrible condition, and proved that you can go into those and create some unique solutions.
The floors, for example, are refurbished wood from a horse farm fence in Lexington. So that's kind of a nice piece of Kentucky history. All of our tables were custom made by a local furniture maker, and all this poplar wood is from an old tobacco warehouse at 18th and Main that was being demolished. So we've got these great, tables with a lot of character to them.
The heart of Nulu takes place along Market Street, which functions as a market of locally owned and operated shops and restaurants. Grassroots enthusiasm by the locals makes Nulu a success, while being less than a stone's throw from the heart of downtown draws in Louisville's guests from around the world. That is, in no small part, thanks to the built environment, which greets all who visit Nulu.
We really see that people respect the historic nature of the buildings and are really using the character that's there to put their businesses in. And that's one great thing about using historic buildings, is you really create a special identity, and it becomes a place that you don't find anywhere else. Another
reason I think it's developed well is that it is a connection between downtown and the Highlands in that area, and there's a ton of traffic. You have that kind of flow of people that could be slowed down if there was something to slow down for.
It's nicely located, right next to downtown. And that's one of the reasons I'm glad we opened up this store, is because a lot of people who are here visiting at the convention center, they don't want to go all the way into the Highlands and figure all that out. They could just take a trolley down Market Street and do their shopping down here and then go back to the hotel. So it's a really convenient location. And that sense of place is so important when people are coming to visit our town and they see that we actually have these areas that just are what they were in 1840 but have modern uses and modern building or modern stores in them.
We do get a lot of out-of-town folks. Linda, who owns the shop, moved her shop from Westport Road Village to here because she wanted to tap into that visitor vibe that comes with being here.
I think it's essential for small businesses to survive, to kind of cluster together and create a synergy where it makes it worth people's while to come and visit that area.
People come to town and they need to check it out, and they come to the coffee shops and the restaurants and the stores and do some shopping. So it's a big range of folks.
Louisville's a great place for independent businesses, and one of the things that is helpful for a small, independent business is to have other independent businesses nearby, so that it's worth someone's while to come down here, park their car, and get out and walk. And they can go eat at the Mayan Cafe, and then they can walk down to Please and Thank You and get a cup of coffee, and they can come in here and check out the fortune teller from Fountain Ferry, see the Colonel, ride the pony, and then they can go down to Scout and get some gifts down there, or Joe Lay Antiques, which I think is one of the best antique stores in this entire area of the country.
It's a neighborhood where all of that intertwines together, and creates this neat synergy.
If Nulu were simply described as a line of shops, restaurants to buy things, it would sound ingloriously similar to a standard shopping mall. Ask anyone about Nulu, and the response you would get are anything but standard. Nulu sets itself apart from a common strip mall by what is already there, the buildings.
I think people understand just intuitively that historic buildings are a great backdrop for being in. You want to be in a place like that because it is special. It has its own vibe, basically, that you can't find anywhere else. And because it comes out of an authentic history that is still in place, it resonates with people. They know that they're in a space that gives them a feeling of what it was like even in the 1840s, 1850s, but they're just doing things that are current, present day type of activities.
The things I'm interested in when I travel are older buildings, historical buildings. A strip mall, I don't even see it. Like, it doesn't even register on my radar. So I definitely have an interest and a preference to reusing what's already there and re-glorifying what is already there. In this area, downtown, Butchertown in particular, and Nulu, right next to it, has a lot of historic buildings, and it's nice to see them, come back to life.
It's been a measured approach, and all of the development that's happened has been very thoughtful, it feels like. What's happened with the East Market District is it's garnered so much attention nationally now and internationally that there's a lot of eyes on it, and I don't think people will let just something random happen. The fact that they're looking at it as a green neighborhood is huge. The city's got money coming in for the streetscape, and they're all paying attention to the character of the area.
The wood and masonry are styled in such a way that even those not well versed in architecture can appreciate their age. The building materials, styled in ways that are no longer used in today's architectural designs, generates emotions into a sentimentality of affection. They spark the imagination of those who pass by them, taking visitors of Nulu back to a different age.
There's a richness that's available for view if you just kind of slow down enough to look at it.
There's mainly masonry buildings you would find in the commercial style buildings. You'll see generally on a commercial Italianate building, which is a little different than the residential Italianates, that they do have actual storefronts. And so you'll have the traditional bulkhead, storefront window, transom windows, and either a double door or a single door. You would go into the shop and it may have some recessed area. You also have a lintel over the whole storefront, and that gives it it gives each storefront its own character as you're walking down the street for the pedestrian experience. It's before cars, when these buildings were constructed, so you were building them at the speed that people were walking out or riding their horses. They're meant to capture your attention in that manner.
But the initial buildings that exist today on this site were storefronts that had an apartment or two above them.
Then it takes on a more residential character with the window openings following along what you would find in other residential Italianate style buildings. So the long, narrow windows, which would also have perhaps decorative lintels, either with incised stone lintels, or they might actually have a type of projection that would be more ornate and Italianate. At the time, Italianate architecture was popular across the country, and it was what was the common style that was used during the time that Phoenix Hill was developing. So that's why you see a predominant amount of Italianate buildings in Phoenix Hill. We have the 1920s gas station so you have even more modern interventions from the early 20th century that are also mixed in Phoenix Hill. So it's a very diverse neighborhood, and it has a great, rich architectural history as well.
If one walks the Nulu area, a host of historic buildings is there to immediately catch the eye. What should also be noticeable is the vast potential in the open spaces along the streets. Unlike some areas of town, Nulu, in its current state, has room to breathe and grow.
It's still early in the redevelopment of the area. There's still a lot of growth potential within the neighborhood as far as development. Because there's a lot of places that are just existing as they have been, and they are a going concern. They're still running their business out of it just fine, next door to a brand new restaurant or something. So there's a lot of range to age of business owner in the area.
I think one of the mistakes that can be made to neighborhoods like this is that you, in a way, embalm neighborhoods by just restoring but not giving it modern character, or character that would include the possibility for modern buildings. And in the end, I think that's a healthy kind of neighborhood that creates, along with the historic facades, a little bit of salt and pepper to help flavor the neighborhood again.
So, even when great effort has been taken to preserve what is already here, there is plenty of opportunity for modern-day architecture to find its place among that which is considered historic.
There is a value to our classic old buildings, old bones of the city, and I think that there is a place for saving those kind of things, but there's also a place for building the new, and this neighborhood gives a fabulous platform for blending those two, and I think that's a healthy neighborhood.
It's more about taking what's known from the history and applying it in a new way. It's just a dialogue more than anything.
I think that the continual use of the fabric of the neighborhood is important, and to keep the authenticity that is there intact. There's a great opportunity there to actually put new buildings there, but that they need to be respectful of the historic fabrics that's there as well, and so that they play off of the rhythm and the scale of the buildings that are in place, because that's part of what makes East Market Street what it is, and you want to keep that character in place.
Over time, a lot has happened in this space, and that the space houses that memory, and it's worth keeping it, because once it's gone, the memory's probably gone too. I tell people this all the time, like, you pay big money for this in New York, that you sometimes have designers that can replicate this. Like, you can make this with a set design look just like this, but it's not going to be this, because this is real and not imitation.
If done properly, the contrast in style of classic structures and newly crafted modern marvels can play off one another in a brilliant display. These new buildings both strive to fit into the surroundings, but stand out on their own. And perhaps that is one of the most intriguing aspects of Nulu. The area is not static, but rather welcomes evolution.
It'll evolve into the next cycle of whatever is happening, but we feel very strongly that it's rolling in the right direction, and that there are a group of very proud people that we've all kind of walked down that sidewalk and been a part of that.
New construction is certainly encouraged when it's infill that is going to bring something new to what that fabric is already, and it just is another layer of time about how that area is being developed, and so it adds to the story of the history that's already there, but it becomes a new intervention that is complementary to the historic fabric.
Because of Nulu's past as an industrial area, there is something to be said about the new trajectory this section of Louisville is taking. By breathing life into these buildings, which can date past 100 years, shop owners and developers are both fitting themselves into pockets of tangible history as well as writing new chapters.
I think that since most of the buildings here are functional and in good shape, it seems like there wouldn't be too much modification just to put businesses in and out of them.
One of the places I find most interest is when you have the extra challenge of an existing building and the history of that building, and trying to make sure you relate what you do to that historic structure, as if it weren't challenging enough to just do the building, add the layer of history, and it makes it ever richer.
So I think that Nulu is going to continue to grow and change, and we're excited to be here, and really excited to be a part of it.
I think the biggest thing it's meant to the city is it's proven to a population that it's okay to move back into an urban setting.
In my spare time, I'm a musician as well, and I've played the Nulu Fest from the stage. And what I noticed from the stage was that the folks that had come out to the Nulu Fest were younger than me, and they seemed very excited about the area and everything going on. And there's a lot of youthful energy that's here that you see when they get in these environments.
There's definitely a push to celebrate the historic fabric of Louisville and what makes Louisville distinct from other communities, what makes it distinct from Cincinnati or St. Louis or Indianapolis, because of the buildings that we have and the history that is embodied in those buildings. That's what is interesting to people when they come to our city, is that, like, this is what makes Louisville Louisville. That it is something that is not just because you're keeping a building the way it looked, but because it creates something that you're not going to find anywhere else.
It just feels good down here. It feels like it's like maybe the best that Louisville has to offer. It's like, you know, Louisville has a lot of great traditions, but Nulu kind of has that new, you know, it's just cool. And I think that's why we're seeing a lot of national media interested in this neighborhood and kind of telling the story of Louisville through this neighborhood. And you know, I think it's great for the city.
The development of this area is phenomenal. The energy of its patrons unprecedented. Perhaps it's a sense of originality that drives people to cultivate and participate in Nulu's new chapter of life. Perhaps there is something to be said of the bohemian artistic vibe stemming from the many galleries which take residence along Nulu streets. Perhaps it's a sense of ownership in carving out a new section of history. A sense of achievement in leaving a mark on the city one calls home. As a well-known Louisvillian once eloquently put, no explanation, no mix of words or music or memories can touch that sense of knowing that you were there and alive in that corner of time and the world, whatever it meant.
Thanks for coming along with us on our urban adventure, and we look forward to seeing you next time on Renovate Louisville.